Hello everyone, my name is Jared Links and I am the owner here at Simple Bites of Life. I want to talk to you today about what is really one of the most pivotal aspects of beekeeping, one of the most foundational keys to your success. You think about pillars of successful beekeeping, you can think of maintaining healthy queens, keeping varroa mites under control, and also having good nutrition in your colonies. Well, when it comes to this third aspect, really the pivotal foundation, one of the most important things when it comes to good nutrition is understanding how to feed your colonies, when to feed your colonies in different aspects of different seasons. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I found helpful. Now let's break this down into just a couple of different realms. So first of all, you've got to understand as a beekeeper, you need to be feeding both pollen and sugar water. So it's essentially, in a human level, it's our steak, right, is pollen to bees, and our potatoes, which is the bee sugar water. That's what it breaks down as. So you have to have both. You have to have both the pollen and the sugar water for a healthy diet for bees to maintain good, solid nutrition. And so there are, of course, several different ways that you can do this. You could use pollen patties, you can use dry pollen, you can feed sugar water via a community feeder, which you put pollen on too, by the way, on top of. You can also take and you can use a top feeder, you can use an end hive feeder, a frame feeder, you can use a front entrance feeder. There are multiple different ways to do this. But the important thing is that you are feeding and that you're understanding the seasonal needs of your bees whenever it comes to feeding. So I want to talk a little bit about the setup that I use, why I use it, why I found it helpful, so that hopefully this will be beneficial to you as a beekeeper in your own context and situation. So I have found it best for me personally. Most of the time I will use a front entrance feeder, sometimes I will use an in-hive frame feeder sometimes, but most of the time I'm actually using a top feeder, which is essentially a feeder that you can drill a hole in the inner cover. It sits right on top of the inner cover. You create a box to go around this top feeder, and then you set your top cover on top of that box. So you have your top cover, you have your feeder, and you have a feeder box that is all on top of the inner cover. And one of the reasons why I find this setup to be so helpful for me personally is because this top feeder has a plastic insert that can be put on or it can be removed depending on the time of the year, right? So beekeeping, feeding bees, these are very seasonal topics, very seasonal areas of beekeeping. And so whenever you're feeding, sometimes the years that's going to be liquid. You're going to be feeding sugar water for a good chunk of the year. But for me, I like to switch over and actually put a dry feed into these top feeders that serve a couple of purposes. So whenever I want to put that top feed in, I just go ahead and I remove that plastic insert, and then I put 5 cups of sugar to 1 cup of pollen mixture into that feeder, which serves the purpose of helping to get the bees a little bit of an extra food help, a little bit of extra pollen as they're going through the winter. It also serves the purpose of absorbing the moisture that automatically comes into the colony. So you think about this, the bee cluster is at over 90 degrees. Maintaining a temperature over 90 degrees in the winter, it could be 20 degrees outside, right? It could be below zero outside. That's obviously going to cause moisture condensation to build up in that colony, which that dry feed takes and helps to absorb. So I can actually remove that clear cover, that clear plastic cover that is on top of that top feeder, so that those bees can come up and they can take that dry pollen sugar mixture, which is incredibly beneficial and helpful. But at the same time, if I want to feed a liquid mixture, such as in the spring, in the fall, in the summer dearth, whenever you want to do this, you just take your plastic insert, you put it back on, and you put your sugar water on there. You don't have to change feeder types or anything, which is hugely helpful in terms of time and work and effort that you have to put in. It just makes everything so much easier for me personally. So that's why I use the setup that I personally use and have found to be helpful given my context as a beekeeper. Now, a couple of points that are also beneficial in terms of feeding itself. As I said, feeding is very seasonal, so understanding the need of your bees in different seasons is really going to be helpful here. And also different types of colonies. So if I see a colony that is struggling, so for example, this time of year, we're really trying to build up our colonies so that we can propel them into a really strong honey harvest later this year. Well, most of my colonies are very, very much built up, but I have a couple that, you know what, they're a little bit behind the others, so I'm trying to feed them to actually give them a little bit more nutrition, a little bit more help, a little bit more nectar coming in, which is going to encourage those queens to lay and all of that. So feeding comes in helpful in that context. Or whenever you do your spring splits, or you get a new spring nucleus colony, you can feed them to help build them up as quickly as possible. Feed them pollen, feed them sugar water. If you want to encourage more brood production, feed 1-to-1 sugar water. If you want to encourage them to actually store more weight, like maybe you're in the fall, you're in that period where you're preparing for that winter season, and you're noticing like, hey, this colony, they have a lot of bees, they're doing good, the queen is raising plenty of brood, but actually they're a little bit light. Well, you can actually give them 2-to-1 sugar water, which is going to help them store up that weight even easier. So there's a couple of variables that really do come into play whenever it pertains to exactly your feeding strategy. For me personally, one of the things that I have found absolutely to be the most helpful is a community feeder. It is so beneficial for me on my beekeeping journey to this point, because I will set out a 5-gallon bucket of sugar water and I will put pollen on top of that 5-gallon bucket so that the bees can come in the winter, or whenever it's above 50 degrees, they can come in the fall and they can get the resources that they need to continue thriving over the course of the winter. So here in Arkansas, I mean, you get a lot of days in the winter where it's over 50 degrees, it's over 60 degrees. And so that gives us an opportunity to community feed and to really help those bees out, to help encourage the queens to continue laying, and to laying a lot so that they can get their population maintaining really, really successfully. Also helps them to come out of winter much better, much stronger, and it helps them in that late summer into fall period to be prepared going into the winter season. So those are a few tips as it pertains to different opportunities that you can use whenever it comes to feeding, different things to keep in mind. Just understand really that feeding and nutrition is so important. It is so important for your honeybees. If you're noticing, for example, in that summer dearth that your queen is not laying as much, well, that's because the resources aren't coming in, so she's going to back off laying. She's going to back off on her brood production. And so it's really important that we as beekeepers understand the way that the seasons break down, understand the needs of our bees different times of the year, and even different colonies, whether they're strong, whether they're weak, whether they need to add a little bit extra weight. Well, if they need extra weight, we're going to do 2-to-1. If they need more bees but their weight is good, we're going to do 1-to-1 sugar water for that colony to help their brood production increase. Knowing all these things helps us to be able to put our bees in the best situation for success, and it helps us to be able to propel them along. Plus also feeding sugar water and having a nectar flow coming in is going to help their cleanliness habits. It just really helps overall for their health as a colony. So these are a few tips for you for feeding your beehives. Let me know what you found helpful in the comments below. Let me know any questions that you might have. Also, I'd be happy to answer any of those that I can. I hope that your beekeeping season is off to a great start this year. We will see you in the next video. God bless.